problem is that that needs money, and that's not something that there's lots of in South Australia at the moment in terms of the health sector. What happened in the UK was there was new money came into the system to underpin this. I've actually been exploring with SA Health about doing that in a limited way, and so it's not impossible, but it's not going to be the same kind of expansion that we saw in the UK.
Alastair?
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to both of you for coming along and being so open with both aspects of the strategic plan and also, as a Faull, on things that are going on at the moment as well, because I think that a lot of students feel like they're out of the loop, I guess, on what's going on. So it's great to see that things are moving in the right direction. I came in with a few questions and most of them have been answered, so I'd like to draw a few things to your attention. We had AMSS National Council over the weekend, at which time a number of issues were raised. Obviously, the training pathway is a big issue for students around Australia. And Professor Burt, I think in yours, you highlighted that it's important for us to be focusing on our graduates coming back to serve the needs of society. And I think that's a really important point when considering the curriculum going forward, that we do address workforce shortages for students, not only in internships and postgraduate training pathways, but then what's available at the end of that as well. So that's great to see. The other point you raised was about full fee paying students, and that's a big concern, I guess, all around Australia. So it's great to see that that's come into consideration.
No, we certainly don't want to give you the impression that that's something that we support, but it's something which is very likely to be discussed at a federal level in the next. Not we've got any intelligence that that's part of the agenda, but it would be reasonable to assume that any incoming government will want to look at what the options are, not necessarily now, but into the future. The point that you made about providing the right kind of workforce, I think is a really important one, and that was one of the reasons that we're exploring this issue about a longitudinal pathway in an urban setting, because I think it's been very successful in the rural setting. I know that there are concerns that it might be difficult for us to replicate that in an urban setting, but that more generalist approach is actually to try to address some of those workforce issues that are beginning to surface quite sensibly at a national level.
I'll come back to a couple of comments. One about the issue of money. Professor Burt is well placed to comment on this. I think neither he nor I have any inside knowledge whatsoever about this issue of fee paying, but by international standards, the government pays a small amount of money to train medical students in this country, considerably less than the United Kingdom, for example. So universities wanting to study, want more money to train medical students, they've got good evidence to support that. Secondly, and I have a lot to do with postgraduate training, as you may well know also, I think there is genuinely going to be more interest from a department of health point of view in people with general skills. I think not everyone's going to be able to go into this super specialised area in the future. I think that sort of helps reinforce the idea that I believe we fundamentally need to produce well-rounded people. While I'm very, very keen to encourage people to have interest within their study, you also need to have very broad skills which will help you get into jobs in the long term.
Perhaps it's also worth saying that we are in dialogue with SA Health about this work readiness and what they're looking for, hitting the ground running as interns. Because I think that transition from being a medical student to an intern, we need to work in between the universities, both ourselves and Flinders and SA Health, to make sure that that is as smooth as possible, and that we're providing people that can go into that first week as an intern as ready as possible.
Jane?
Yeah, sort of on a different tack, I was just wondering if there is a transition to graded passes, how soon we could expect that to happen, and how it would affect people who are currently in the medical school soon.
What year are you in? It's at the talking phase. In practice, to get any significant change like that through the university, it takes about 2 to 3 years. And it's something, because it would be considered to be a major change, we have decided that any major changes, that or others, we want to wrap it all up together with this MD plan, which is going to be about a 3-year plan. So that's the time frame. The minimum time frame would be in 3 years, and if we do it, and I'm saying this is it, we're just talking about it, we might just start with year 6, for example. It's not, the initial discussions haven't been about the whole course, it's been more about the latter half of the course. And one of the reasons, and I'm keen on this idea as well, I've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years, is that again, at a postgraduate job level, and that's another side of my life, when I see people coming through who I know are high quality students that have great difficulty showing that on their CV, that means they aren't given, they can't get the information that I think they should be able to get when it comes to applying for what are increasingly competitive jobs in the future. So it's sort of, and it's the same with not just jobs, it's for postgraduate scholarships, research grants. It helps if you can demonstrate on the CV that we're not going to go back to the old days of having I came fourth in my year. That's not the idea, because that was always very woolly how those things were decided. But there are ways of expressing the students done working in a certain band or something like that.
So just linked to that, I mean, Professor Faull, we're talking about the prizes. We're going to keep an eye on just how those are kind of presented and so on, and maybe increase the profile of that. So it's actually not just necessarily about how we record the results from examinations and so on. It's about recognising and rewarding excellence across the board. So and it is about making graduates here as competitive as possible compared to graduates of other universities, because it is going to get, like it or not, it is going to get tougher. And you need to be able to try and differentiate and distinguish yourselves from those coming from elsewhere.
Dr. Kirshner.
Perhaps the benefit of a recent graduate who works with the same as two questions. One's very broad, one's very specific and common. I really like this model, and that's the core question is touches on work readiness and what plans you have for junior doctors to be involved in the development of the medical curriculum. In the past, it's something where we had Professor this, head of that, this, running the medical schools, medical programs, when really we're aiming to produce competent interns.
Yes.
We're struggling with this. We don't have any doctors involved.
Okay.
My first question is whether you have any specific plans to involve you.
Yep. So the retreat that we held earlier in the year, which was the kind of basis for this, did have recent graduates. So at your immediate past president of the AMSS, for example, we have a recent graduate slot in our strategy board. It has been difficult for them to get to those meetings, and so we've now got a plan that 2 people are going to sort of shadow one another, so that there should always be someone at the strategy board. And the strategy board is the one that really makes all the key decisions. It would be great to have their input, along with the student input, into the nitty-gritty of what this programme will look like. So we now have a group that's meeting weekly. There will be student representation of that. It would be great if we can get graduate input into that as well. We recognise it can be difficult just to fit in with the rest of the day job. But we're certainly not doing this just the professors in a kind of secret, sort of society. And we are, as I said earlier, it's not just us working with the students, it's other stakeholders. We are wanting to know from the employers what it is they're expecting in terms of work readiness.
Can I say a couple, Tam, I mean, it's not for want of trying, please take my word for it. There's interns on the clinical practice committee that Joe Thomas runs, and we've had a slot for a recent graduate on the Year 6 committee for a long time, and I can count on the fingers of that hand how many times they'll be able to get there. It's a real, as you know, when you're an intern, it's a real problem getting the meetings. And I was the person who suggested we have 2 people for the strategy board who can hopefully at least one of them can get there. It's a real challenge.
My next question is very specific.
Sorry, speak up.
Yeah, sorry, my next question is specifically and whether you've done any evaluation on the impact that the removal of that OSCE from fourth year, which I presume has had, and whether any plans to change that or reinstate the year for OSCE.
No, there's not any specific plans to reinstate it, and that's partly just from a resource point of view. It's a very challenging thing. As you probably are aware, there's now OSCEs at the end of a number of the Year 4 rotations that were there before. That was in part to replace the Year 4 OSCE. We haven't done a formal evaluation. It's tricky to know quite how to evaluate the effect, except to say that there hasn't been a noticeable change in the performance of the Year 5 OSCE. It's only been probably 1 or 2 years that we've had students come through who didn't do the Year 4 OSCE. But there aren't plans to bring the Year 4 OSCE back at this stage.
I think Ethan had a question.
Yeah, so I'm sure you hear more about this, but my understanding is that most of the programs around the country are graduate entry only. And all of us...
About 50-50.
Okay, and all of us here surely are thankful that we had undergraduate entry, but what do you guys see as the advantage of that system as opposed to just going for a postgrad entry only?
I think there's a lot to be said for retaining the bulk of our entrants coming from school. I have been involved in running a graduate entry program in parallel, and it has its own merits, but only, I think, in a mixed economy. I personally would not favour us moving towards a graduate-only entrance for all sorts of reasons. And I think retaining some of the distinctiveness of us having the school leaver entrance is actually quite important. So there are some places that are, on the face of it, graduate entry, but also now have a feeder a couple of years where you can go from school and then flip over. Flinders do that, for example. So it's not quite as simple as it's either one or the other. But my own personal belief is that that top line would be my favourite option, is the predominant route in the future for University of Adelaide, but for us to have the option for a parallel but much smaller graduate entry course.
Yeah, I'm very strong on it. I think there's a big marketing, that's not the only reason to do things obviously, but it's a big marketing advantage in having an undergraduate program. And a town like this is perfect for having an undergraduate and graduate program. And we graduate doctors at a younger age, so apart from the couple of programs that have a small number of students who come in 2 years and then do 4, all the others it's 3 + 4 minimum, so you graduate people a year younger. It's an unusual one. North America it's all graduate, and so the Canadians, there's a market there for Canadians to come to Australia who want to come straight out of school. I think the quality of it, I believe very strongly that the quality of the graduates that have come out of this undergraduate program for many years are very high quality, so I don't think there's any real justification for changing it. I think having us an undergraduate will actually give us an increasing market advantage over the years. And in fact, as more and more programs move to graduate, we're going to get more and more high quality school leavers who want to come to our program in the state.
Ed?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. So I've got 2 questions. First is regarding graded passes, coming back to that topic. So I understand that you're trying to that, and I can see the benefits of it, and I would agree with it somewhat, but I find it hard being a student for 3 years now. Often, a lot of rotations, the person marking you don't actually know you extremely well, and that's something that's happened for my rotations as well. Other people have mentioned it quite often, and so how do you streamline if everyone's going to be graded? How do you then ensure that that's equal and that's my main concern?
Sure. It's at the discussion phase. So, for example, what year are you in? Sixth year. So, for example, in 6th year, one of the things I propose is that we would have an overall grade for the year. Actually, it's a more complex answer than that. Let me go back one step. So, one of the things we're discussing, and maybe I could have mentioned it tonight, but is changing the assessment scheme into different streams. We might have a separate professionalism stream and a separate clinical skills stream and a separate scientific basis of medicine scheme, for example. That's sort of thing we're talking about. All this is discussion, and Tom hears these discussions all the time because he's at most of the meetings I'm at. Anyway, and so it may be that for 6th year you will have an overall mark for a stream. So it won't, I'm not proposing at least in my initial discussions that the grading will be that you've got an A for surgery intern, an A for med intern, an A for whatever. It'll be an overall thing for the year, maybe in individual streams. So while there is some unavoidable variation in grading in any sort of clinical attachments, that if you lump it all together, that's going to reduce the level of noise. In 4th and 5th year, then you've got the MBU exams as well. So the precise way we would put it all together would be, isn't decided, but it would be a lot of it trying to remove that uncertainty of variations in assessment in small parts of the course. Now there's also this talk about moving to what's called a programmatic assessment type of system, which means that every little assessment item during the year will actually be taken into account for the final of the year as well, and that's a rather more ambitious program that we've been talking about. So the precise way we're going to do it is far from certain. It's sort of thing that looking at, if you look at the current 6th year, or over the last few years, the 6th year results that people get, 90% of 90+% of the marks advanced in 6th year are A's and B's already. So they're not suddenly going to have bad results. If anything, we're going to people going to come out with good overall badge or overall results.
So I guess it's a distinction between the A and the B. Like currently, no one really worries too much because it's non-graded passes, but I can imagine it being quite a big concern for people if that's going to have an impact on.
Yeah, but then when you're doing it over 7 or maybe 8 different assessments in the year, again, a lot of that noise will disappear and will be compensated for.
That's certainly the theoretical basis for the programmatic assessment, because if you've got multiple assessment points, then it kind of flattens out some of those variations. But just to reassure you, we are conscious of some of the issues around at least perceptions of inconsistencies in assessment. We're going to do everything we can to minimise that. And we are also, to this, one of the slides that Professor Faull had up around variations in the amount of assessment across sites and in particular some rotations. That's something we're trying to address as well. Because the assessment has got to be something which is proportionate, adds to the value of learning, and is not actually then, there is an example which is being discussed at the moment where, if anything, it could be detracting a little bit just because there's so much of it. So we are conscious of these things, we're trying to work towards.
Your second question?
Yeah, my second question is regarding global health and a bit into details of the actual program. As you mentioned, Professor Burt, global health is now becoming quite an important issue, and the 21st Medical Professionalism that's come out, the article has shown that it is becoming increasingly that medical graduates should be aware of. And having chatted to people from other countries, well, not countries, but other states and their medical schools, it hasn't been a big topic in the curriculum, and I wonder how much of it have you already planned into it, and what is the potential of pushing for more?
So at the moment we're at the stage of just getting the jigsaw together about what that 6-year program would look like. And we have agreed to these 4 domains that Professor Faull has referred to, and we need to weave into that these program-specific graduate specific attributes, which include things like awareness of global health. It includes some other elements about palliative care and dignity and so on. So there's a number of things there that we have to. But have we got a course already lined up for global health? No. But it's one of the themes that has to be there. It almost certainly won't be a block. It'll be something which will be woven into. The way that I think our next phase is going to go in the detail of this is to take some cross-cutting themes. There was one that I got this week, for example, about men's health, and where there are various, there's a curriculum being developed across the country around men's health. and it all makes a lot of sense. It's not something that's in the curriculum at the moment, but there are bits of it in the curriculum, and it'd be about articulating what that should be and what the outcomes at the end of the programme should be, and making sure then that we've got it encompassed in the different disciplines.
One of the other relevant things about that question also is that in the Level 9 MD program, you need to have what's called a capstone experience or equivalent, and that's where the research underpinning comes in. But there seems to be a moderate amount of flexibility in how you design that, and so some of the programs around the country are designing these capstone experiences around electives, where you might do and I don't know the precise details, but I imagine it'd be something like you might do a literature search or a literature review of a particular area that if you were interested in global health, you would plan to do an elective somewhere, you would do a literature review about, let's say, malaria in Malawi or something like that. You would go there, you would do a small project, and then you would come back and write it up as a reflective experience, and that would become your research capstone experience. So I think that with the new system, I'm quite keen that the students have ways of exploring particular interests like that as a bit of like a stream almost. So if some student was particularly interested in global health, they could have a bit of a pathway in there and something to show for it again.
And one of the ways that we might be able to enable that is by building good partnerships with other medical schools, other institutions internationally. We're beginning to develop some strong links with a couple of centres in China. And Professor Faull and I were both out in Myanmar recently, and there's a desire for there to be a closer link there. And that's where you would really see generalist and a little bit of specialist stuff. So I think that also plays into the vision of the VC around study abroad. So it would be taking what we currently do as an elective and making it slightly different and seeing it as part of that capstone experience. And that would be easier if we can do that. It would still be open to students to do their own thing and to seek out an opportunity somewhere, but if we can identify a few key partners where we would receive some of their students and we would send some out from here, then I think that would make that all easier.
I think we're just down to repeat questions now, so I might ask one, and then I think we've got Louisa and Jack, and we might close it off there because it's nearly 7 o'clock. So one of the things that attracted quite a bit of interest from amongst Team Ed when this was discussed was the notion of the longitudinal urban program. And obviously there are potential attractions, but some of the concerns that students had was how do you make sure you see the appropriate case mix, and then sort of logistical things about the actual organisation of it. I just wondered if you could elaborate on how you see the urban program in the new medical program, what it would look like.
I think there's various ways to try and approach that sort of thing, Tom, and so the program that I looked at last year was at Harvard in the Cambridge Alliance in Harvard, where they've got an urban program. The equivalent we've got is the rural program. They're both very resource intensive. They require a lot of organisation, and students have pages and they have an elaborate computer system. This is in Harvard for matching up all their patients and where their patient's going to be at any one time, and they can actually, with the switchboard there, they can have their pager program that they'll be called either 24 hours a day to see any of their patients, or only between the hours of 6 in the morning and 12 at night, or whatever. But it was a very large logistic exercise. That was a whole year thing, and we've talked about, for example, maybe making it one semester at one site. And there's, again, possibilities has not been discussed with the hospitals, so don't sort of talk about this too much, but you can say at Lyell McEwen you could do significant proportions of your time at Lyell McEwen. For example, Lyell McEwen has adult medicine, has obstetrics, and has paediatrics. There's not many sites in Adelaide that do that, for example. You could potentially do some of it in general practice in an urban setting in the city. That's a little more challenging because urban general practice is fairly narrow. But I think it's perhaps not the logistics that's important, it's more the principle that we want to find ways that students can follow patient journeys. So the traditional teaching model where you tend to see a patient once and then not, unless you're on the ward a month later, you never see them again. Have ways that, and so I can envisage ways that students still do blocks, but also have a group of patients that they're following while they're doing their block-based teaching, and you might say, pick up the pool of patients at the start of the year, and you might follow 2 2 patients with cardiac disease, 2 patients with cancer, 6 patients with renal disease, because it's the most important. That sort of thing. So there may be ways of giving students the experience without necessarily going the whole way that they've done at Harvard, for example.
I mean, I don't think that we're looking for that to be an exclusive, so that everyone moves to either rural or longitudinal. It would be an option. And it's to address some of those issues around what kind of workforce will we need. And also a reflection on how successful the rural program is. I know that it's a slightly different setting, but actually that's a good example of it working.
All right, so we'll just have Louisa and then Jack.
So my question is kind of about what your image of the Adelaide graduate is. Like, I'm hearing a lot about being a generalist, which is a reflection of the workplace needs, but kind of how will that marry up with the need for like an excellent CV for kind of postgraduate competitiveness?
Oh, well, I think you can talk about excellence in generalists as well as specialists. So I think that's what I mean by excellence. It's not just necessarily about the cutting edge, for the want of a neurosurgeon or whatever. It's actually about excellence as a healthcare deliverer, irrespective of what area you work in. And that's actually within the proposed new graduate attributes, about focusing on that excellence, irrespective of where or what one is practicing. I think that we're both saying the same thing about ideally a program here equipping our graduates to be able to go out into the workplace, be work ready, to be excellent in that generalist, but to have the capacity for those who want to develop the specialist skills if they're going into something sort of very rarefied. So I mean, Adelaide University will still want to and have to produce those who go into different walks of postgraduate life, and it's about making sure that it's excellence in all of those.
Yeah, I can tell you some things it's not, but I'm not talking about. It's not talking about people who want to do surgery, specialising in surgery from year 4 onwards, that sort of thing, which is what some institutions do. Maybe a way of thinking about it is that I want our graduates to have a broad range of skills. Because as an intern you need a broad range of skills, but I want our graduates to be the best interns of all. Okay? So they're broadly trained, but they're the best of the lot.
And that certainly the impression that I hear around the place is that our graduates are well placed to hit the ground running, and anecdotally are better than those coming from many other centres, many other universities. So anecdotally we are producing the right kind of things for the workplace now, but we need to continue to focus on that and build on the excellence.
Final question.
Yeah, so talking about the 3-year plan of the non-graded, the graded passes coming into play in approximately 2016. Will that be for all current students and new students in this system, or will it just be implemented for the new system?
That's too difficult a question.
Yeah, it's like a lot of these, one of the questions about the new MD proposal is it's at the discussion phase and we haven't got definite answers to that yet. But basically you're asking, would we just phase it in over 6 years, or would we just do it all at once? It's simpler to do it all at once.
So what we're going to have to do in the course of next year is not just flesh this out, but have all the detail about what that new programme would look like for our internal assessment by the university, so that they're comfortable with what we're doing, but also then by the AMC, because they have to give their blessing for this as well. And you've heard that we will have another accreditation visit in 2014, which is really related to the 2011 one. It would extend our accreditation beyond that, but we're doing that. They are doing that with us in the knowledge that we have flagged up. We may well be going for an MD, and they would be a separate exercise. They need to look at that probably the following year. So this will take a little bit of time, but there's a huge amount of work for us to do in detail now that enables the university and the AMC then to say, yeah, this is fine.
With that 6th year grade as well being a collation of all the placements, of all the programs you do, will that be available as a single grade, or would that be available as the rotation itself? Talking about, you know, the generalist grade.
Again, it's that's just a discussion point at this stage. That's just a proposal that I put up, one of the possibilities of how we would do it. But it would be modified if we go down this domain-based assessment that we would need to say, if for example we wanted to bring out professionalism as an individual grade, an individual area to be graded, we would need to modify the Year 6 supervisors' assessment forms and have a specific page that was just on professionalism, for example, and then we would take each of those pages from each of the rotations and make that into an overall for the year. That's the sort of thing. Now, also, don't forget that we have a banding. The primary reason we have a banding system is for feedback to you guys about how you're going. And it's not proposed necessarily that would disappear, because it's important that a student knows how you're going. C for that, that means only just straight through, whereas I don't know how it works. So we would still have a system where the students are fed back progressively or regularly during the year about how they're progressing. But what would actually, when you talk about graded passes, it's about what goes on your transcript, okay? Because at the moment the university transcript says non-graded pass. And I can tell you when a student applies for jobs and they've got a transcript that says non-graded pass, the committee thinks, don't know what that means. That means they might have just passed and they might have been top of the class. So it doesn't give much useful information. So it's really what goes on the transcript at the end is what we're talking about.
And I would reinforce what Professor Faull has said earlier, that we would not be looking to have a ranking, you know, number 1 to number whatever. That I think would not be helpful. Interestingly, in the UK, all the medical schools have to grade their students. Initially, it was going to be quartiles, then they're going to do deciles, because this is all to do with entry into the equivalent of internship. That's a very dangerous road to go down, not one that I hope happens in Australia. But I think being able to differentiate when it comes to applying for not the internship necessarily, but thereafter, I think for all those reasons we need to find some way of making sure that you're able to present yourself as strongly as possible so you do compete well with graduates of the other programs.
All right, well, I think that we're extremely fortunate to have had this session. I think there are some really exciting things in the strategic plan, and I think we're very lucky to have two of the key people involved in developing this plan and then implementing it in the years to come here to talk to us for an hour and a half. That's, I think, brilliant, and probably doesn't happen at any other medical school in Australia. So please join me in thanking